just basically emulating my father, who was a civil rights activist, and we grew up watching him put his life on the line and put his ideals and everything on the line to fight for social justice. He was a Black history professor, worked for the Board of Education during the day, and taught Black history at night. So a lot of what our ideals came from our father's stance on social justice. And you know, one of the most powerful moments that was formative in my life, and I talk about this quite a bit, was when I was like, I guess I was 6 or 7 and Russell was 2 or 3. They were building Rochdale Village out in Queens, and my father was the captain of the picket line, and they were bringing some bulldozers in, and it was all about they didn't have any Black construction workers there, and you know, and he would not allow them to bring the bulldozers, and he laid down in front of a bulldozer, and this, you know, to see our father do something that courageous and that powerful, you know, has had a profound effect on us later on in life. We didn't know how much then, but you know, I talk about this with Russell quite a bit. And he said he didn't remember it as poignantly as I was because he was a kid, but he does remember all the hubbub about it, and he remembers us talking about it in the family.
Now, what issue do you think today is pertinent in terms of social justice? For example, in the African American community, the Hispanic, Latino American community, and just the general society.
There are a lot of issues that are confronting us as Black people and as people within the society. I think the most critical issue for Black people right now is Black family. I don't want to call it the dissolution of the Black family, but you know, I don't see the type of role models our children need. I don't see the type of care and mentoring that young people need in order to grow to be healthy, transformative people. I don't see young people entering into the area of social justice anymore, and having a feeling for community. You know, a lot of what media has done is make this a very me generation, and without guidance from family and, you know, extended family, young people are following what they hear in the media more and more. You know, everybody's watching TV areas online, watching these videos, and these, you know, you are what you see and what you eat and all this, and so that's what they're fed. So I think that one of the big issues for us is to take in hand and to guide our young people, because you know, when we think about who our next generation is going to be and who our leaders are going to be going forward and the type of issues that they're going to confront, we don't necessarily need them talking about they need a new Bentley. You know, they need this or some of the dangerous images they put out about relationships between men and women, about you know, all of this stuff that's being put out there and being fostered by media is detrimental to the family. And I may be old school and say this, but I think the family is the social unit that teaches you who to be, and also the Black church. You know, and I'm not a big proponent of church, but I know that most of my moral and ethical things came from my parents making me go to Sunday school and go to church and this, that, and the other. And you can get it from other places. But all of these things went to inform us of who we were. And these things are not as strong as they used to be. And so I think we need to strengthen our institutions in those areas. And I think we need to strengthen our cultural institutions also.
Now, as an artist, how have some of these issues affected your work, and how has some of your work affected these issues?
As an artist, I mean, most of my work, the paintings and the stuff I do, and most of the stuff I write is about spirituality and the relationship of human beings to each other and the relationship with human beings. But my work as an artist extends beyond my personal work. My work as an artist extends into the community organizing and the organizing of the arts that I do. The reason for the Rush Philanthropic Arts Foundation and the reason for most of the things I do is to ensure that there's equal access for our children and equal access for our artists to have their voices heard. And well, you know, the voices of artists are really crucial in shaping young people's lives. You know, just the fact that you teach young people how to create something, I'm not trying to create any more artists. What I'm trying to create is independent and help to create, not me personally, help to create is independent thinkers, people who think creatively. You know, like I said, when we were talking, we're in a world of trouble here, and somebody's going to have to be creative enough to think of new solutions for us. And education in the arts allows children to see things that weren't there within themselves and manifest them into the world. That's what art is, to come from within yourself and create something that wasn't there before. And that extends into all areas of our lives. You know, once you start thinking creatively about one thing, you can't stop. You're thinking creatively about your situation and the situation around you. I found that the creation of deaf poetry, which was much more powerful than giving poets a voice, it created a lot of access for teachers to find something that kids were interested in. And so poetry is a gateway to literature and literacy. And so there are a lot of literacy programs right now in the country that were started and emulated what the poets, adult poets were doing. And kids are now speaking to each other, speaking about issues that they really care about. And if those sort of things were expanded, you know, our kids would be talking about things that really meant something to them and not about material things.
Now your new project, Deep in Your Best Reflection.
Well, that's a book of little love poems. That's a whole different thing.
And it's pretty hot, but it really explores some of the issues that are affecting relationships between the sexes. Like that.
Yes, it does. Well, you know, it's a very personal book. So it talks about my relationships with people, missing, longing, being in a relationship, losing their relationship, starting new relationships. It talks about love and lust and giving to each other as lovers and as partners. And it talks about some of the beauty of relationships. And so in that way, but it's really personal. It started out as a text love letter to a girlfriend of mine. It expanded. And when, you know, I started doing that, I said, this is a book. And I started creating it as a book after that.
Can you read something from this?
Long distance loving. On this glorious morning, smelling of sex and ambition, I remember you cradled in my tomorrow, deeply looked. Your hair grazing my eyes and wrapped tight to me, gentle half sleep drowning in sweat and lover's breath. And here I hold you in mystic chant and hoodoo conjure. Deep juju you and me, deep juju indeed. But you know, I think poetry should do a lot of different things. I think one, it should expose social justice issues, it should expose social issues, expose political issues, it should talk about those sort of things. But also it should talk about you and how you feel about yourself in relationship to other human beings. And primarily, for me, at least with this book, about how I felt about relationships that I've been in, how I felt. It was sort of cathartic, thinking about relationships that failed, why they failed. And one of the cool things about this book, most of the books with text, I did it, it's called Deep in Your Best Reflections, poems in 160 characters, because that's how big a text page is.
Right.
On the phone that I was using at the time. And so one of the things that I thought when I said, let me see, because I've really maintained pretty good relationships with all my ex-girlfriends. And so I picked a couple of them who were willing to receive these poems about our relationship.
These poems?
Yeah, I texted them to them. And they would comment to me back on it. And so that's how I wrote the book, texting them to ex-girlfriends, and you know, yeah. And they would get the poem at 2 o'clock in the morning or some shit. Actually, it brought one ex-girlfriend. We went out for a while afterwards.
Oh, wow.
But the reason we were ex still was present. So we kept that, but we you know, we still friends. So and we decided that was good. But we still, you know. But it was a good exploration of my feelings about, you know, where I've been in my life in relationship to my relationships with people.
Now, do you think this book will touch African American men in particular? Or is it? Do you think it's?
I would tell you a funny story. After my first poetry reading, after, you know, my launch party for the poetry book, a brother bought the book and he called me up the next day and he said, "Dad, I just got to tell you, I read that book with my girlfriend last night. It turned out really good day." I think the book You know, one of the things that I think that's been African American men have been accused of is being closed off emotionally and not expressing the way they feel. And I don't know if that's entirely true, but it does show that, you know, you can still be a tough guy and have feelings and show those feelings. You know, you can be tough enough to be sensitive.
Definitely.
Yeah, so you know that's. But so I think the book has done that, and more men buy the book actually than women. Go figure. I thought it was for you know, women love the book, but men get this. I'm getting this from my old lady. So you know, when I decided that I wanted to try to pursue what spirit is in my painting, Wilfredo Lamb was the person who gave me the most inspiration there. When I looked at forms and shapes and things, Norman Lewis.
No.
But then there are people, great people like Romare Beard and Jacob Lawrence for the work they did documenting who we are, our times and this and that. That's really, really important, and they're inspirations in different ways. Not necessarily my painting practice, but just who they were to the movement, to the African American arts movement, which is and then a bunch of contemporary artists who I really admire, but not as much as inspirations as those artists that went before me.
And would you say spirituality plays a big role in your artwork?
It really does. In some way, shape, or form, I've always been trying to capture man's relationship to spirit, man's relationship, how a spiritual connection not only to a higher power, but that same spiritual connection is the same connection between human beings, between man and man and other human, man just being human on the earth. It's a whole spiritual experience. It's, you know, your physical body is walking through it, but you know, this is a spiritual experience, and the connection that you have to other human beings, you communicate on a spiritual level. You get a vibe from somebody, you feel those person. The words emulate how you're feeling about that. And so, you know, my pursuit with color, shape, form is always trying to touch spirit in some way, shape, or form. I think that the internet is the biggest opportunity to get information out there beyond what used to be our local audiences of people. Harlem Times, you know, back in the days would be just interested to people that could get it in Harlem or beyond. Now the Harlem Times can reach the whole entire world. I think the challenge with all internet stuff is marketing and letting people know you're there. The content is there, and you create great content. It's figuring out innovative ways to get the word out that this is here. I think that, you know, our stories told by Harlem Times and magazines like African Voices are critical, and you know, we need to figure out how to best utilize that medium, because it's the medium not only of the present, but it's the medium of the future. You know, paper, print, and stuff is fast becoming obsolete.
Absolutely.
You know, books are becoming, you know, most people are getting their books on what's that, Nook and stuff like that.
Right. E-readers.
E-readers and all of that stuff. So I mean, you know, all this electronic data is really important that we get it out that way, because that's the way young people are getting stuff. You know, older folks still are into print media, get our magazines. But you know, Ebony just started at ebony.com, and you know, people are starting to. The .com is, you know, is the way people are going to get their information. So I think you guys have a huge opportunity right now to get out there with these stories about what we're doing in our communities and be really influential and allowing people to see the inside of what goes on in that and control the message. Because, you know, a lot of the message, if it's created by other people, is not the accurate message. And so if we tell our own stories, we have a better chance of, you know, making some change happen, because we have a beautiful story.